Good morning, brothers. I can't tell you what a blessing it is for me to be here this morning. And as Josh mentioned earlier, I'm very humbled and just honored to be here and to share my story. And really, my story is about God's faithfulness in my life. And so I just pray that God is glorified through what I share today. And so before getting started, I would like to show you a picture of my family, and I'm just going to kind of hold it up. And so the silver fox there is my wife, Heather, and we got married in July of 2017. And my stepson Conager is next to him. Thank you, John. And Conager's 20, and he's actually just starting school at Cal State Bakersfield, and we're playing baseball there. And then the twins are Avery and Riley, and they're 18, and they just started school at Texas Tech. And so just wanted to kind of introduce you to my family. So this talk, I'll be honest with you guys, really stems from a time when I was really struggling to trust in God's faithfulness. And it was through that period of time that God really revealed to me that the simple truth, that God is faithful even when he doesn't appear to be faithful. And though that might seem like an obvious truth, it's awfully hard and difficult in times of trials and difficult times in our life to really stand in that. And so my struggle with all that began in 2009. And I'm going to show you a picture. John, if I could borrow you one more time. So this picture is of my wife, Angela, and myself on our wedding day. And Angela was my college sweetheart. And we dated for 5 years, and we're married for 19 years. And I loved her more than life itself. And so in 2009, Angela felt a lump in her breast. And we went in and had it biopsied. And we soon discovered that she had stage 1 breast cancer. And though stage 1 is an early stage of cancer, her biology of her tumor was such that it was a really aggressive tumor. So they suggested that we really get aggressive with the treatment. And so that started a 2-year process of surgery, chemotherapy, and then about 7 months of reconstruction surgery. And it was a really difficult time for us spiritually to go through that. And but we made it through. And as anybody's been diagnosed with cancer or a serious disease, you realize, you kind of move into a new norm and you kind of go on with life. And so we did. And then the end of 2011, Angela started getting some really bad headaches. And she started slurring her speech and started showing other signs that something wasn't right. And example would be, I remember she was going to go renew her driver's license test. And Angela was always pretty studious. And so that was something she would never have worried about ever. And she was really struggling and really concerned about being able to pass the written part of the test. It was so unlike her. And I couldn't understand kind of what was going on. But more and more symptoms like that started showing in her. And so the beginning of 2012, I took her to our primary care doctor, and he ordered an MRI to be done of her brain that day. And we got a call within an hour of the MRI, and usually it's not a good sign when you get a call that quickly, and it wasn't that day for us. He told us that we need to get Angela to the emergency room right away, and that she had a mass on her brain, and it was causing pressure on her brain. And if we didn't go in immediately, remove that pressure, she probably wouldn't make it through the night. And so that day started a journey where we soon after found out that Angela had a glioblastoma brain cancer. And there is no cancer diagnosis that's a good diagnosis, but a glioblastoma is probably one of the worst that you can get. And the reason being is there's no therapy or treatment. And really from diagnosis to when you pass on, typically is 3 to 9 months. And so that started a year-long journey where Angela had 4 different craniotomies. She had chemotherapy, she had radiation treatment, and it really didn't matter what we tried. The cancer just kept coming back each time, and her symptoms got progressively worse and worse, and it got harder for her to come back each time. And I'll never forget, like, it's one of the most difficult days of my life is the day we were sitting in the oncologist's office, and I remember Angela looking at me, and she just said, "Graham, I just can't do this anymore." And I went home that day and I made plans with hospice to be able to come in and kind of help her in her last few weeks of life here, just to manage the pain. And then Angela went to be with the Lord in April of 2013. And looking back in preparation for this talk, I went back through my journals at the time, and it's amazing. My journals were so full of me asking God, why? How can this be part of your plan for my life? I just don't understand. Like, I know you're a God of love, but how can you take someone that I love more than life itself from me? I was really having a hard time and struggling. But God is faithful even when he doesn't appear to be faithful. What could have broken me in my faith in God's faithfulness, God actually used that period of time to deepen my faith and trust in him. And I don't know how he does it, but only he can do something like that, to actually not bring about my answer to prayer and I'm going to come to a deeper faith in him. But really, God did that through that period of time for me. And what he was also doing, he was also preparing me for Heather and Heather's cancer battles. See, Heather, before I met her in 2005, she had thyroid cancer and had her thyroid removed, and then had radiation therapy. And for a period of time, she's been cancer free. And then about a month after we started dating, she had some really bad pain in her back, and got progressively worse throughout the day. I remember calling her several times throughout the day just to see how she was doing, and it got worse throughout the day. And I remember calling her finally that night and just, how are you doing? And it was so much worse. So I went and picked her up and I took her to the emergency room. And we found out that night, they told us that she had appendicitis. And I guess the normal protocol with appendicitis these days is you allow it to burst and then you go in and clean it up. And we're thankful they didn't do it that night. And again, to me, it's an example of God's faithfulness, because when they went in that night, they removed her appendix and they found a tumor inside her appendix. And if they would have allowed that to burst, that could have spread throughout her whole abdomen area. And so that surgery actually started, we did a lot of other diagnostic tests. So Heather had scans all throughout her body, and we found a mass on her lung about that size. And so after she was able to heal from the surgery, the appendix surgery, we went in and had that mass removed, and we didn't know if it was cancerous or not at the time. And then she also had a portion of her lung removed that day too, because it was attached to her lung. And we're thankful to God that that came back as non-cancerous. And then more recently, in January of 2019, Heather felt a lump in her breast. And so we went in and had that biopsied and found out that she had stage 2 breast cancer. And it was also in 3 of her lymph nodes. And so that started a year-long journey of, surgery. She had about 30 of her lymph nodes removed, chemotherapy, radiation. And, I'm happy to say as of today, Heather is cancer-free. And she just actually had a follow-up checkup, her 6th month on Wednesday. So we're thankful for that. And I see some people clapping, so thank you. So my main point of the talk today is really that God is faithful even when he doesn't appear to be faithful. And so, that raises the question, and I know a lot of us are going through certain experiences right now, but what area of your life are you currently having a hard time or struggling to trust in God's faithfulness? And so I know there's examples of people on this Zoom call today where you've been in a marriage struggle and you've been asking God to heal your marriage for years, and you just haven't seen him answer that prayer yet. I know there's also people on this phone call because of COVID that are at home, and you feel isolated and you feel alone, and you've been praying to God to heal you of that, and you just haven't seen it yet. And I know there's also people on this phone call because of COVID that are out of work and have lost their jobs, and your finances are struggling, and you've been praying and asking for God to find you that job, and maybe he hasn't done it yet. Or there's also people on this phone call too that are having challenges with their kids. Maybe your kid has gone like the prodigal son in their own direction, and you've been asking God to bring them back to him. Or there's people probably today that have struggled with addictions to alcohol, drugs, sex, pornography. And you've been asking God to heal you of that for a long time, and maybe he just hasn't done it yet. Or maybe you're like me and you're struggling from the loss of a loved one, or you yourself have been diagnosed with a serious illness. And you're wondering, how can this be part of your plan, God? Where are you going to show your faithfulness in all of this? Well, the good news is we're not the first to struggle with times of doubt, right? So I love this book because from cover to cover, story after story, it just shows God's faithfulness over and over and over again to men and women full of doubt and questioning him at times, right? Yet he continues to shower us with grace and mercy. And in preparing for this talk, there's one story in particular that stood out with me, and I'd like to share it with you guys if you don't mind. And if you got a Bible, let's turn to Luke 23, verses 44 through 49. The death of Jesus. It was now about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And having said this, he breathed his last. Now when the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God, saying, "Certainly this man was innocent." And all the crowds that had assembled for this spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, returned home, beating their breasts. And all his acquaintances and the women who had followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. And it's really that last sentence that just stood out to me and hit home to me and pierced my heart. And all his acquaintances and the women who had followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. And just imagine how the disciples felt as they stood there that day and they watched Jesus up on that cross. I mean, for 3 years, they had been following him. They left everything to follow him, their family, their friends, their children, their communities. And I only imagine that day what they were wondering. How can this be part of your plan, God? Where are you going to show your faithfulness in this? See, their expectation was that Jesus was the Messiah. And because of that, they believed that he was from David's family line, that he would reign as king, that he would execute justice and righteousness in the land, and that he would free Judah, that Israel would be safe under his rule, and that he would run the government and it would be for forever. He will usher in peace that would never end, and he would defeat his enemies and free them from Roman rule. His reign would be over all the earth and it would be forever. If only we could be there that day and whisper in the disciples' ears, just wait 3 days. This is all going to make sense. Just wait 3 days. See, we know Jesus to be all those things, right? And what didn't make sense that day, God would soon prove his faithfulness. And it's a truth that we need to hold on to in times of difficult times, when we're going through trials, that God will ultimately prove his faithfulness. God is faithful even when he doesn't appear to be faithful. So even though the healing that Angela and I had prayed for never came, God showed his faithfulness by leading me out of that time of despair. And I'd like to share with you guys something that I wrote during my time in my journal, if you don't mind. So these 3 years we spent fighting the cancer were some of the best and worst times of my life. The best because I got to spend every single minute of every day with my wife. We were able to go to every single appointment together and treatment together. I can't tell you how much of a blessing it was for me. It was the greatest honor in my life to be able to serve my wife in a time she needed me most. And it was the worst of times because I can't adequately put into words the pain associated with seeing someone you love suffer so much. Now I've been a Christian for 21 plus years, and I can honestly say that I'm currently going through the most difficult time of my life. After 3 years of watching my wife fight for her life, I am mentally, physically, and spiritually depleted. It's often difficult to go home to an empty house. My best friend, my lover, and my soulmate is no longer there. In essence, I'm learning to live out a new norm. It's in times like these that you really come to an understanding of your level of faith. I think you never really know how strong your faith is until all that you know and hold dear is taken away from you. I prayed thousands of prayers, and so did so many, for God to heal my wife. The scriptures are full of God's healing people, his children, and we believed he was going to do the same in our case. For reasons only he knows, he chose not to. Oftentimes, when something like this happens, the devil will come and attack, putting thoughts in our heads like, why didn't your God heal her? Was it because you did not have enough faith? How could a God of love allow her to suffer like that? And why would a God who loves you take her from you? A part of me is upset with God for not healing my wife. At times I feel let down. Another part of me knows he owes me nothing and he has given me everything in Jesus. I know we live in a fallen world and our lives here on earth are but of a blink of an eye. The conclusion is I do not know why this all happened, but I know God knows. And I also know nothing happens in our life that doesn't first get sifted through the loving hands of our Father. He's the only one who can use suffering as a tool for blessing. And so I continue to go to him and ask him to heal my brokenness and to use it for his glory. I trust him that he will see me through this difficult time. At the end of the day, he owes me nothing and I owe him everything. He sacrificed it all for me on the cross. God's word promises that he works all things for good for those who love him and are called according to his purposes. In faith, I stand on this promise. Though today I do not see the good yet, I know it's coming. As a result of our suffering, my perspective on life is changing. Where I used to be so consumed with the cares of this world, I feel God is preparing a more eternal perspective and focus in me. I am so thankful to him that my wife is with him in paradise. She's no longer in pain, no longer suffering. Though it aches beyond words how much I miss her, I'm excited that one day we will be reunited. I'd like to share something I read the other day. It says, to know that even in his most distressing dealings with me, or for my deepest spiritual gain, is to be able to say in the midst of bereavement, sorrow, pain, and loss, the Lord gave and the Lord taketh away. May the name of the Lord be praised. Job 121. See God in all things and know God causes all things to work for good for those who love him. So those words to me are another example of God's faithfulness. Because though I wrote them, they weren't from me. They were from my Father through his Holy Spirit reminding me that though I wasn't experiencing that yet, that freedom yet, that healing, it was coming. And it has come. During that time period, looking back, I realized that God showed his faithfulness a lot when we were going through that trial through other people. And for example, the numerous people that provided meals for us and that prayed for us, they were examples to me of Jesus's love during that time period. To Karen K. Miller. Karen K. Miller is a dear friend of mine and ours, and she's an occupational therapist. And after each one of Angela's craniotomy surgeries, because it was in her left frontal lobe, she would have to relearn how to talk, how to walk, how to pick up a fork, how to use a pen, write with a pen. And each time it got progressively harder and harder for her to bounce back each time. But Karen, I can't tell you how many hours Karen came in and loved on us and just devoted time to just helping Angela to get back the ability to be able to communicate. Again, it was another example of just God's faithfulness through another person during that time period. To Steve and Marilyn Fowler, I work for the Fowlers, and they are two incredible people, and their love and support during that time period just meant the world to me. And they paid 100% of my salary for a whole entire year while I worked part-time caregiving for my wife. I mean, there's not too many employers that would do that. To Pete Durand, Pete used to work with Angela down in Orange County, and we became really good friends over the years. And Pete would call me twice a week for an entire year just to check in and see how I was doing. And I so look forward to those calls. I cherished them. I'm so thankful for him. To Scott Garrison. And Scott Garrison, who's like a brother to me now, one of my best friends. I'm thankful that Scott picked up a phone call and called a stranger in me and invited me to my first journey group in 2013, because God knows exactly what we need when we need it. And he knew I needed the journey and that group of that band of brothers to come around me and to continue to point me back to him during that time period when I was really struggling. God showed his faithfulness too by healing my broken heart and allowing me to find love again with Heather. I mean, I've had 2 amazing marriages, and I know there's people that go a lifetime without having a love, and I've had 2. And to me, it's another example of God's faithfulness. I'm so thankful for her and for him. And I also saw God's faithfulness and showing it through Heather, through bringing her through 3 different battles with cancer. And then he brought a husband into her life who understands the cancer journey and could come alongside her and help her during her time of need. And this next one, I don't say it to boast, but he brought a man of God into her life who wants nothing more than to seek him. And so it's amazing now she and our stepchildren are turning and seeking him and chasing after him. I mean, God, you are so faithful. Thank you. And this, I don't know if you guys can see this, but to me, this is an example of God's faithfulness too. And this is just an ordinary Father's Day card. But this means so much to me in two ways, really. One, it's a Father's Day card because Angela and I were never able to have any children. And we tried for a lot of years and we couldn't understand, like, we thought we'd be great parents and we just couldn't understand why it wasn't part of God's plan for our life. But God had a different plan. And he ended up bringing children to me in a different way. They're just my stepchildren. And so this card, one, means a lot to me because I never, ever thought I'd get a Father's Day card. And it's my first Father's Day card that I got. And then two, I'd like to share with what they share on the inside. So Riley says, "Thank you for being such an amazing dad to us. I could not be more thankful to have such a God-loving, selfless man to be my stepfather. Love, Riley." And then Avery writes, "Graham, thank you for choosing us to be your kids and loving us more than we could ever have been loved. You mean the world to me, and I'm so lucky for you to be my stepdad father figure. Thank you for all your love and laughter. Love you, Avery." God, you're so faithful. So having gone through what I went through with Angela, it's been a lot different this time around with Heather. And the reason it's been different this time around with Heather is I realize that I am not in control. That control is an illusion. That God's in control. And if something comes into our life, it's got to first get sifted through his loving hands. And so if he's allowed it in our lives, he's got a greater plan and purpose for it. And so I read this the other day, and I'd like to kind of share it with you guys. It says, at times God will appear like an unloving father, but he's not. He will appear like an unjust judge, but he's not. He will appear distant, but he's not. He will appear like an unkind friend. He is not. God is faithful even when he seems like he's not. You know, I think God, I know God shows his ultimate sign of faithfulness by the gift of eternity. So what the disciples didn't know that day, they soon would realize 3 days later that God is faithful and he will prove his faithfulness. You know, Angela got her ultimate healing. She's with our Father in paradise and she's no longer feeling any pain or any sorrow. And to me, it's just a reminder again that God shows the ultimate proof of his faithfulness by providing a way for us to have eternal life, a way for us to be with him for forever. So I'll kind of close with this. Just imagine the impact we have on others when we trust in God's faithfulness despite our circumstances. You know, we're always being watched, right? Whether it be our friends, family, children, co-workers, other believers, even non-believers. And when we choose to trust in God's faithfulness, regardless of what we're going through, we witness to the world of God's faithfulness, not only here on earth, but the eternity to come. And so just imagine the impact this has, especially on the unbelieving world. So it raises a question. Would it be worth it if what you're going through, if one person came to know Jesus and God's faithfulness through the trial that you're experiencing? I know Angela thought it was worth it, and now so do I. So I'll just conclude with this, a couple discussion questions for your tables. Where are you struggling to believe in God's faithfulness is the first one. And the second one is, how might he be showing you his faithfulness, but you're missing the signs? Thank you, brothers, and God bless you.